Alright, so this one's going to be addressing, well, one of the many issues that South Africa faces on a day-to-day, and that is crime. But not just any crime. We're specifically talking about organized crime. Government organized crime. So this is Ernest Roots, very prominent voice here in South Africa. Very based voice as well, so let us get into it. This is regarding the military and how they are fundamentally stealing their own weapons. For what purpose, I wonder?
So recently at the South African National Defence Force military base at Tabatshwane in Littleton, it was found that there was a break-in and that several R4 rifles and grenade launchers have been stolen.
Sounds great.
The SANDF has confirmed that this has indeed happened, that they are investigating it, and that they weren't sure if perhaps more was stolen or not. Now this, on the face of it, is pretty bad, but it gets even worse if you consider that at the very same military base, just a few years ago, there was another break-in where about 18 R4 assault rifles and pistols were stolen. And surprise, it was found to be an inside job.
Surprise!
Now this is not just a problem at this one particular military base in South Africa, but in the South African National Defence Force in general. In fact, between 2019 and 2023, at least 39 South African National Defence Force weapons were stolen and 12 were reported lost. But even that...
And this is where I always find it interesting, you know. People love to make the claims of, oh, you know, like, let's just take, for instance, you know, the farm murders. Oh, you know, the farm murders are simply just because South Africa is a very, shall we say, very dangerous place. And how, you know, it's got nothing to do necessarily with any kind of white genocide or anything like that, which I always find interesting. They'll just go make the claim, oh, you know, don't be so fragile, don't be so ridiculous. It's got nothing to do with, you know, white genocide. It's just simply because of, once again, South Africa is a very dangerous place, and so we need to think about it more in terms of crime and how to deal with the crime, as opposed to, if you start connecting the dots, you'll start realizing that, wait, hang on a second. You've got people stealing weapons from military installations. You've also got and the reports are out there, you can go have a look at it, at how the farm murders in particular do seem to have a very military aspect to them, in a sense that they're very well organized, very well orchestrated. There's been talks and reports saying that there's been military grade jammers used, military grade weapons being used in the farm murders. I wonder where they're getting these weapons from.
Is just the tip of the iceberg. It seems that criminality at military bases in South Africa is an ongoing and a growing problem. In fact, at least 10 military bases in South Africa, there have been illegal land invasions. In other words, criminal elements and sometimes syndicates even simply invading military bases and occupying property for themselves, taking up residence, constructing sites and so forth. Now just think about that for a moment. At least 10 military bases this has happened. It's not an isolated incident where people just walk up to the base, they just start occupying parts of the base for themselves.
Yeah.
Now, from a broader security perspective in South Africa, it gets even worse if you consider the extent of the problem within the South African Police Service, or SAPS. Between 2019 and 2024, the South African Police Service had lost
and also just one of the knock-on effects of this is also the fact that because the police service, because the military service here is such a shambles, you've got this incredible rise also in private security firms in South Africa. Like, without the private security firms in South Africa, this place will be immensely worse. There will be far, far more crime, if that's even possible. Which, at the end of the day, it is possible, but the point is there would be far more crime simply because the police, they're underfunded, so they actually can't do much, as well as the military as well. I don't even think we've got planes or anything like that. I think maybe we have like one helicopter or something like that, which is dilapidated. Something like that. I don't think we have any ships. We don't really have anything, really. And if we do have, it's not more than 10, I think. Or not even more than 5. And they're so dilapidated and rusted and up to crap anyway. So, you've got all these elements. And then you've also got the idea of, not only is it dilapidated, not only is it falling apart, not only is it defunded. Defund the police. But it's also the idea of that there's rampant corruption also happening within organizations, i.e. this is why the military people are stealing guns from the military. It's an inside job. To what end? Well, farm murders for one. You look at the idea of what's happening currently with all the xenophobic stuff, well, which has been carrying on for forever, really. You've got, shall we say, native South Africans, black South Africans, that crash out because their brothers and sisters from Africa are coming in and and are taking their jobs. So they're cross about that, rightfully so. But the thing is, they keep on voting. If you vote for the EFF, if you vote for the ANC, if you vote for the MK, you are voting for Pan-Africanism. You're voting because the government, these leaders in government, they want their brothers and sisters to come over. So don't get cross if you vote for those parties and then you see illegal immigration happen. It's by design.
At least 3,400 firearms. 3,000.
What's that?
South African Police Service had lost at least 3,400 firearms. 3,400 firearms that was lost by the South African Police Service or that were stolen. Now, the problem with all of this is that there are just too many scandals for us to keep up with. It's very difficult to keep up with scandals just within one department in South Africa. Just the scandals within the South African National Defence Force. Or the scandals within the police service. Or pick a government department. And perhaps the response to that should be that the issue is not so much to keep up with the scandals, because that somehow implies that we're trying to get them back on track. We need to respond to these scandals. We need to see what can we do to get the South African National Defence Force to take better care of its military bases, to respond to criminality within its own rank more effectively. And perhaps that's not what we ought to be doing now. Perhaps these ongoing scandals, this flood of scandals in South Africa, is just evidence of the fact that South Africa needs a much more decentralized government. So South Africa needs, to put it very bluntly, some form of constitutional change. And what do I mean when I say that? I mean a political system that does not facilitate the excessive levels of centralization that we have seen over the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a ruling party that's been ruling for the past 32 years, and everything they've touched has turned to crap. They failed on every single metric they failed to deliver even on their ridiculous promises, which were ridiculous. They failed in every regard to do anything. They've succeeded, which is fundamentally what the whole communist regime is about, the whole communist ideology is about. They've succeeded in the destruction of capitalism, which fundamentally is what communism seeks. It seeks to destroy capitalism, and it does that by making empty promises so that people will elect these communist nut jobs into power. And then it goes about attempting to destroy capitalism. Expropriation without compensation, for instance, is one of them. The whole idea of defund the police, I know that's very big in America and the UK and Europe. We're living in a society that's fundamentally defunded the police. I suppose in the UK the argument could be made it's not necessarily defunding the police, it's more just making the police useless and sympathetic to illegal immigrants as opposed to its own citizens. So it doesn't really matter, as Rich says, it's got nothing to do with, attempting to address each individual issue, because there's millions of issues. Communism is designed to create problems, and it does so. You have to take it out, root and stem. And until people are willing to have that kind of conversation, it's just going to carry on. And it's going to get incrementally worse and worse and worse. But because, communism and destruction is synonymous.
Because what has effectively happened in South Africa is that government has become immensely centralized, with a very small group of political elites taking control of virtually everything in the country. But the catch is that they do not have the basic competency to run a country.
Well, and again, this goes back to, this is what communism does. It's the idea of big government controlling absolutely every aspect of life. So it's funny because they would love to talk about, you don't want a police state. But that's okay, because under communism, you won't get a police state, because communism will make it impossible to have a police state because they'll defund the police. So there's no problem regarding ever having concern that there will be a police state, because they'll defund the police, effectively make lawlessness acceptable, and people can just do what they want. And people left to their own devices will be chaos. But once again, communism loves chaos. It wants it.
And it's not just that some departments are failing, it's that every single one is failing. Now, what does that tell us? Surely we should conclude from this that this country needs some form of systemic intervention, some form of constitutional realignment, to use the notorious term. What we need in South Africa is a decentralized state. What we need in South Africa is self-governance. In other words, government must be much closer to the...
We need self-governance. We need separate nation states. Back under apartheid. Ooh, scary apartheid, I know. But back under apartheid. The apartheid order had the idea of the Bantustans, which they had on paper. And they wanted to do it, where all the different tribes of the blacks would go ahead and get their own piece of land. And the land was in prime real estate, very good farming land, all of that kind of stuff. They were able to live their lives. The white people would also be separated. That's where you get the idea of Cape Independence. We would all be down there in Cape Town. And fundamentally, the rest of South Africa would be left to all the different black tribes, and it would all be separated. And that would have kind of been the only way in order to foster some kind of peace. But once again, unfortunately, because black people do have a tendency to adhere to tribalism. And interestingly, tribalism and communism, there's a lot of overlap. So it makes sense that people from tribalistic ideologies would adopt communist ideologies very, very swiftly, and it would make sense in their brains. So you need the idea of self-determination. You need the idea of nation-state in South Africa. When communism gets to the stage that it's in now, you need drastic solutions. Because otherwise, if it carries on like this, it's going to end up like Zimbabwe. It's going to end up like, dare I say it, communist China. Or I suppose in this regard, it would be more the Bolshevik idea, so it would probably have starvation. So it would probably be more akin to Stalin and Lenin, I suppose. Because if you get the expropriation without compensation, and that carries on for too long, you're going to have no food, because all the farms are going to get taken over by black people. And unfortunately, it's true, but black people don't know really how to farm in terms of a industrial level of farming. They can do simply farming just for their family. Once again, it's the idea of tribalism. They can only do it on a small scale. When it comes to commercial farming, they won't be able to do it. And you can check it out online if you want to. You can just find out all the failure stories regarding black people attempting to do commercial farming. It just doesn't happen. But nation states, self-determination. That's the only way it's going to work. And I don't see that coming anytime soon.
People, or peoples, to put it in the plural. In other words, that the various nations and communities that live in South Africa should have a much higher say over their own affairs. But there's one more point that should be made from all of this. While the South African Police Service are losing firearms by the thousands, and while the same problem is playing out within the South African National Defence Force, the South African government wants to clamp down on firearm control. They want to make it increasingly difficult for legal firearm owners to own a firearm. For people who need firearms for their own self-defense.
So fundamentally then it's in the government's eyes, it's legal if you have a firearm illegally, and it's illegal if you have a firearm legally. That's great.
To have firearms. And so it's so obvious that the problem in South Africa is illegal firearms, or at least that is one aspect of a much deeper rooted problem. And it is so obvious that the problem in South Africa is not law-abiding, peace-loving citizens who carry firearms for their own protections and who sometimes have to use it to protect themselves.
So then it's fundamentally it's if you're a law-abiding citizen, they loathe you because it's the idea of you want to abide by the laws of capitalism. That's why you're a bad person. You want to adopt this adhering to a flawed system in the communist brain, because obviously they hate capitalism. They hate the idea of capitalism, and funnily enough, capitalism and whiteness go together synonymously. So by you wanting to adhere to the idea of law, and capitalism is the law, then therefore you're a bad person, and therefore we will do everything we can to make your life a living hell. And ... you fill in the blanks regarding what that means.
What can government do? They want to clamp down on the law-abiding, peaceful firearm owners to make it as difficult as possible for them to defend themselves. But we should remember...
And again, defend yourself from what, I wonder? What's going to happen with all these guns? I mean, clearly there's already, as you can check online, and if you're in South Africa, you can clearly see it in your day-to-day. South Africa is a very violent place, but if more and more weapons get stolen and political rhetoric is becoming more and more violent, could we be looking at something in the near future that might not necessarily be too great, I wonder?
That there's a certain sense of morality, a certain sense of authority, a certain sense of the difference between right and wrong that cannot be dictated by
well, unfortunately, people don't have that.
If a government is trying to clamp down in a way that is so grotesquely and obviously immoral, that is so obviously a violation of the basic principles of justice, the question we need to ask ourselves is, to what extent should we comply with this? And this is not some form of a call for illegal activity. It is, however, to say that within the state of affairs in South Africa, the extreme levels of crime, violence in this country, the extreme problem of illegal firearms, considering all of these things, if the South African government tries to clamp down on law-abiding, peaceful gun owners, the natural consequence thereof would be that law-abiding, peaceful, legal gun owners would eventually become law-abiding, peaceful, illegal gun owners.
Exactly.
They cannot clamp down up to the point where we are not able to defend ourselves. And in as far as they are trying to do that, it's necessary for us, as peaceful, law-abiding citizens, to take a stance and to say, there's a certain line that cannot be crossed. There's a certain point at which we have to say, we will not abide by these discriminatory laws that, in practice, does nothing other than to persecute us.
True. Well, and I mean, that's the thing. It's me personally, I think that point of diplomacy is come and gone. Ernest Roots himself, when he was still working at Afriform, tried to reason with ANC. Afriform attempted to have dialogue with them, tried to make appointments with Cyril Ramaphosa to go discuss things. And it never quite panned out, and that's why him and a lot of the other people, when he was still working at Afriform, decided to go to America to attempt to get assistance. This is why Ernest is working, this is why he founded Lex Libertas and is currently working with the Young Republicans Club. They were here a couple of months ago and is attempting to get assistance from them regarding the issues in South Africa. But yeah, in terms of discourse, in terms of diplomacy, that ship has sailed. The ANC, even though they lost the majority, they're still the majority in terms of the GNU, and the GNU government is a joke, and all the other parties are simply pandering to the ANC. So no, I mean, diplomacy's run its course. They're not interested. They still hold all the cards. They see no reason to change, because the idea is, until capitalism and whiteness is eradicated, then they haven't achieved their goal. And until South Africa becomes a communist hellhole, they haven't achieved what they've set out to achieve. And yeah, people stealing guns, organized gun theft from military installations and from the police force. It really does get you thinking as to what is next, I wonder. Always something. Anyway, folks, that's pretty much it from me. We'll check you on the next one. Cheers.